Okay, I'm going to do a demonstration here on loops or iterations. So namely, in AP Computer Science, we have the while loop and we have the for loop. Both allow us to repeat a certain series of code or actions several times. So I'm going to start with an example of basically I'm going to roll a die or simulate rolling a dice or a die 1,000 times. And I'm going to count the number of 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is to create some sum variables that I will increment inside the loop. So in other words, if I roll a 1, I'm going to increment 1. Okay, so we have that. Now, I'm going to use a for loop to iterate 1,000 times. Okay, so this is how a for loop works. I'm sure you've read about them, but this is the initialization case. So we start I to be 0. Okay, the second thing, separated by semicolons, is the condition. So as long as this condition is met, then whatever's inside the loop of this for loop, let me go ahead and whatever's in here will keep happening. Okay, and then you have this step here, which for this time will just be incrementing I. So what's happening here is I starts off to be 0. Checks to see, are you less than 1,000? Yes. So it's going to do whatever's inside this loop. Then it's going to increment I to become 1. The next part is this. I becomes 1. Then it checks this again. If 1 is less than 1,000, yes, goes into the loop again. So this loop will run 1,000 times. Now notice I started it at 0, but I did a strict inequality here. So it will go up as long as I is 999. It won't do it when I is equal to 1,000 because it's not less than 1,000. So it's common to do that, or you could start this at 1 and have less than or equal to 1,000. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the math.random. Now that's going to give me a random number, a random integer, either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Notice I added the 1 to get either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. If you're not clear on how to do that, go back and look at the math video. I spent a little bit of time talking about the random method. Okay. So what I'm going to do at this, I'm going to do some conditions. If R is 1, then I'm going to increment 1. Now what 1 stands for is how many times I rolled a 1. It started off to be 0 because I hadn't rolled it before I got into the loop. But if I roll a 1, I'm going to increment 1. So I could do an else if R equals 2, 2 plus plus. Else if R equals 3, 3 plus plus. Else if R equals 4, 4 plus plus. Else if R equals 5, 5 plus plus. Now, we talked a little bit about the whole if, else, if thing. I have multiple conditions, so I'm using the if, else, if. It's fine to use an else here if you're sure that R is going to be one of these 6 things. I've had students before that messed this part up. Maybe, let's say it was given a 0 every time. Then every single time it would increment 6. Okay, because if it didn't satisfy any of these, you go there. So you could do an else if here. Now you might be thinking you need an else. You don't necessarily need an else. The whole thing about a return value in a method, you would have to make sure you return something in a method. But this is not. We're not returning these values. We're just incrementing them. Okay. In fact, we don't need the else ifs. We can just put ifs here. What the else if does allow you to do is it can only be one of these 6 things. Okay. Of course, it can only be one of those 6 things anyway because R is going to hold 1 value. But that's what an else if would be. The difference between an if, else if, and just 6 ifs is if this is true, then it's not going to check any of these 5. So it makes it a little bit more efficient. Okay, but if you had 6 ifs, it would check each one to see if it was true or not. Okay, so that does that. Now when I get to the end of the loop, I can print out ones. Let me do 1, ones. I'm just going to do this. 2, 2s. 3, 3s. 4, 4s. 5, 5s. If you're watching, you need to fast forward it. That's perfectly fine. I'm just trying to get this in where we can see all this. 6, 6s. Okay, so at this point, this loop will have flipped a coin or simulated flipping a coin 1,000 times, and each time we will increment one of these 6 variables. So at the end, these things should add up to 1,000, but it'll tell us about how much each one occurred. Guess I deleted that. Alright, so this will tell us how many times it occurred. Now, I don't really know how many times we would expect, but they should roughly be equal. They're random. Basically 1,000 divided by 6, whatever that is. That's about what you would expect for each of them, but that's, that's random. That's about what we would expect. Okay, they're all around 170, 160, 150, 180, so that's what we would expect. And if you get a bigger number, let's try 6,000, because if I do 6,000, then I expect roughly 1,000 for each. Again, it's random. But that's what we get, and that's what you would expect if you did actually flip a coin or roll a die 6,000 times. Okay, now I'll do the same thing with a while loop, because any for loop can be done with a while loop, and actually any while loop can be done with a for loop. It just takes a little bit more effort. So I'm just going to replace. So what a for loop does, it has a step, it has a condition, and it has an initialization, and it has a step. Now what a while does is it's just a condition. So while just says as long as this is true, then do everything in here. Okay, so we can do this same thing here. If I said int I equals 0, and I just said while I is less than 6,000. Okay, now at this point right now, that's an infinite loop because I is 0 and I is less than 6,000. So that just means that this is going to keep going. I is always less than 6,000, so it keeps trying this thing. You never get to this point right here. You never break out of the loop. What we want to do is just increment I every time in the loop. So now I increments 6,000 times, and eventually I becomes 6,000 and it breaks out of the loop. So that would accomplish the same thing. We can try that. Okay, and just what we would expect. So that's a for loop and a while loop. And again, go to Coding Bat, practice some of the loop. All of warm up 2 deals with loops, so you can really get good practice dealing with loops with those problems.